Great days start with great underwear. So if you're looking for something special, give Tommy John and gift a better day. Everything we make is meticulously crafted from breathable stretch fabric for the perfect fit, including our sleepwear for him and her. It feels good to give, but it feels great to give Tommy John. Find something for everyone and pick up something for yourself, because at Tommy John, greatness is in our very fabric. Shop TommyJohn.com/Spotify right now and save 30% site-wide. TommyJohn.com/Spotify. See site for details.
Hello, I'm in the bath. Don't judge me. Don't clip this and put it on a podcast. But I can't be bothered typing.
Welcome to Quiet Riot, the politics conversation that 9 out of 10 doctors recommend for your blood pressure. I'm Alex Andreou.
And I'm Naomi Smith. At Quiet Riot, we have the courage to say occasionally, do you know, Alex, I just don't have a strong view on this. Politics doesn't have to be shouty, and it doesn't have to be boring.
Our ambition is simple: to bring reason, analysis, and laughs to you, guided by one simple principle, that you're as smart as, if not smarter than us.
So switch off the doom mongers, plunge that cafetiere, and put your feet up for another Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot.
Welcome to Quiet Riot. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi, the Elphaba to his Glinda.
And boy, have we been defying podcast gravity. On this week's show, the entire world seems to have had a spin on the chaos wheel of fortune. From South Korea to Syria, from Georgia to France, from Elon Musk to Vladimir Putin, we try to discern if there is a pattern to the madness.
Plus, the leader of the Welsh Conservatives has stepped down, just as Reform eye up the coming local and Senedd elections, experience a burst of defections from the Tory party, and a flirting with Elon Musk.
To help us wade through that rather wide-ranging lot of stories, we welcome back to the studio the former secret Tory MP, author, comedian, and world's most luxurious mullet bearer, the iambic pentameter wonder that is Henry Morris. Hello, Henry.
Shemai.
Now, you're mainly here for the South Korea and Georgia stories.
Well, I presume so.
Rather than Wales.
But Henry, what is your favourite Welsh word? And follow-up question, I mean, I love the Welsh language to listen to, and I wish I wasn't such a butcher when it came to pronouncing Welsh words. So have you got any advice for those that don't want to embarrass themselves sporting a little pigeon Cymraeg?
First answer is Buwch Goch Gota, which is little spotty cow, which is a ladybird. Which is the programme my daughter's obsessed with at the moment.
Buwch Goch Gota.
Very good. Da iawn chi. And yeah, the advice is be prepared to embarrass yourself, because I turn up at the school gates and everyone's speaking Welsh. And if they're speaking English, I know it's because they're speaking to me. So I throw myself in there and occasionally get things very wrong, but then everyone laughs.
A few days ago, I recorded a bonus episode with Yasmin Serhan on the US election, her reflections on the rise of the sort of populist in chief there, and the impact it would have on geopolitical crises like the Middle East. As a final thought, I reflected on the Syrian conflict reigniting out of nowhere, and how difficult it is to predict the effect of so many parts moving around at the same time. Cue the South Korean president attempting to impose martial law, Trump choosing a QAnon conspiracist to head the FBI, while preparing to dump Hegseth, protests in Georgia, the French government on the brink of collapse, elections in Germany, Musk dangling $100 million to Farage, who swallowed a spider to catch the fly. I don't know why he swallowed a fly. Perhaps he'll die. So I thought it would be interesting to try and ponder what is plainly an imponderable. Is this an unprecedented period of instability, or do we notice it more because media is global, news is 24/7? And are there common threads behind what is driving all of this churn everywhere?
I wonder
if we're noticing a lot of it because of the impact that it is having on larger economies and, I'm sorry to say, predominantly white countries. We notice America because we in the UK have the so-called special relationship and because we're economically and security-wise, very allied with them and tied to them. But when you look at places like the war in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the death toll far outstripping Ukraine, South Sudan, Myanmar's junta extended their martial law earlier this year in the same region of the world as South Korea, but not one that the UK has current, obviously there are some historical, but not such current geopolitical links to and financial links to, that maybe we just are noticing it more because the countries that are in a flux at the moment are the ones that we feel more affected by. Because there are many other countries having crises, and crises, I think, are often all around us. But I just wonder if we're feeling it more now because it's more impacting on rich white nations.
What do you think, Henry?
The continued junking of rules by various people around the world, it continues unabated. And we've had many examples of that here, but the South Korean president just chancing his arm, it looked like to me. I mean, see what can happen. But then in Syria...
Literally every single expert in the area was like, what?
Well, exactly. And
why?
Nobody saw it coming. And then consequently, nobody saw what was going to happen next when we had everyone coming on the news last night. People just looked blankly back at the questioner, not knowing what came next. But then the sudden insurgency in Syria, which might seem sudden to us, but probably has been building, there's probably been time for that to build over there. I think there might be a common thread, which is scarcity of resources, a climate crisis. In Syria, the pro-democracy protests in 2011 broke out off the back of a drought. In Ukraine, it had a big effect on us because fertilizer prices rocketed by fourfold. The coffee crop in Brazil and Vietnam's just gone under. We're going to notice price rises for that for us in that soon.
Olive oil's only just come back down.
Same thing's going to happen with maize. It's only going to go one way. Food is going to become more expensive. Instability increases on the back of that, I think.
I love Naomi just stamping
coffee and olive oil, the only things I consume.
Stamping her woke metropolitan credentials on that.
Those are things that affect us, isn't it?
But, okay, so that's definitely one factor. The danger with leaving it at that, I guess, is that we end up in a situation where we say, well, there's nothing we can do to turn that around very quickly, so there's nothing we can do about this growing instability. But there are other factors that feed into it. Is there something psychologically that means when you feel insecure, you kind of turn to strongman figures, which then feeds more global instability, which makes more people feel insecure, which makes them turn to their local strongman figures and 100%. Kind of eats its tail.
The malign operatives, they thrive on chaos. Exactly. Yeah. And so part of me was thinking, as I was looking at lots of very elevated river levels as I came in on the train, Farage and Tyson, Trump, do they ideologically disregard climate crisis, or do they know it's a real thing, but if they can continue to allow it to get worse, they'll thrive in off the back of the chaos?
And I do think when you are somebody who doesn't have a huge amount of time to consume news because you work hard, that if you see another country with a strongman leader, you think, well, we need our version of that just to combat it. So I've heard quite a lot of Trump sympathetic, but otherwise relatively normal Americans saying, oh, but at least he'll stand up to Putin. And I think that can just be a shorthand for, well, if they're up to it, we've got to fight fire with fire for some of them.
Is there a genuine argument for Trump in the White House in terms of geopolitics? And I'm not talking about any nation. I'm talking about America, the controller of the largest military in the world and the most intrusive military in the world, I would say. They are a country that has made it their business over decades to play world policeman. And so is there an argument for having a pretty mercurial psychotic in there that will make more regional, lower rank psychotics around the world
think twice,
wind their neck in a little bit?
It's like the ultimate deterrent. Don't need nuclear weapons.
Because who knows what he might see on Fox and how he might react the next morning.
Just going back to what you're saying about people seeing those leaders, I was talking to a Trump supporter the other day in West Wales who's made a lot of money in crypto recently and took a deep breath.
And you were talking to one, so they're not
in
all
Welsh.
bots.
We're talking in Welsh.
I'm talking in English.
No, but so they're not all bots. You met a real life.
I know loads. I know lots of Trump supporters.
But a real life Trump supporter that's also into crypto. I mean,
oh right, he
that's
ticks all the boxes.
Yeah. Is his last name 4381002?
He's I think I've thought about that because you talk about people who don't consume a lot of news.
Yeah.
He doesn't consume a lot of news, but his crypto's doubled in value. And so I took a breath and tried to list all the reasons you wouldn't like Donald Trump, and they all fell on deaf ears. And then he was like, no, it's good for America, it's good for the world. And I said, it's not good for America. They're closing their education department. We're going to let all these different states teach all sorts of nonsense. And he said, like, what? And I said, well, like the planet's 6,000 years old. And he went, it is 6,000 years old.
Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And a lot of them deny the moon landing.
Yeah.
And
100%
they really
credulous.
bought into that.
And one of them is now in charge of the FBI.
Well, indeed.
Cash. I know you're probably going to be head of the CIA, but do you believe that you can deliver the goods on this in a pretty short order the first couple of months so we can get rolling on prosecutions?
Yes, we got the bench for it, Bannon, and you know those guys. I'm not going to go out there and say their names right now so the radical left-wing media can terrorize them. But, excuse me, the one thing we learned in the Trump administration the first go-around is we got to put in all America patriots top to bottom. And we got them for law enforcement. We got them for intel collection. We got them for offensive operations. We got them for DOD, CIA, everywhere. We will go out and find the conspirators, not just in government, but in the media. Yes, we're going to come after the people in the media who lied about American citizens, who helped Joe Biden rig presidential elections. We're going to come after you. Whether it's criminally or civilly, we'll figure that out. But yeah, we're putting you all on notice.
I mean, I don't know a huge amount about Kash Patel, but Alex, I'm guessing you've done your research.
Not massive amounts. I mean, there is a lot about him out there because the last decade, he's been, let's just say, very active on the right-wing podcast circuit. And he's going around saying all sorts of things that would disqualify you from caring for your own child, let alone being in charge of the FBI. He's a conspiracist, and he's been openly saying that he's going to go after Hunter Biden. Like, he's published an actual enemies list. It's in the back of his book. He's got an enemies list on the back of his book. He's been saying that he looks forward to arresting a load of journalists for, having spoken against Trump. I would say he's a cut above your ordinary conspiracist. He appears to be not just truly deranged, as most of them are, but also quite focused and vindictive about it. So he's a nut with a plan. He's not just a regular nut.
I think in terms of your question about Trump and could this actually be good for America to have this strongman version of history figure leading them again? I think financially, no. When you look at what happened when he imposed tariffs last time round, it actually hurt US services exports quite badly. Now, one could argue that the UK could therefore potentially benefit from that. But then when you think about his missives about the World Trade Organization and NATO, I think to be a leader prepared to abandon, if not destroy, some international organizations just cannot, even in the midterm, work out well for the USA. So, I'd argue no. But nonetheless, there is a perception, particularly amongst voters who don't have, as I said, the time and the inclination to delve into political thinking and consuming news and trying to understand trade economics and all of these very esoteric issues for the vast majority of normal people. It is an easy, compelling argument to say, yeah, let's have a tougher guy than the other tough guy. Your point, Alex, about Kash Patel going on podcasts. When we think about, well, where is our version of that on the progressive left? Who are our big figures out there making the case? Well, they exist, but they don't do the rounds. They keep their heads down. They don't try and insert themselves into the informational space that busy people do occupy. They don't go on podcasts to
like who's our Elon Musk?
Well, indeed.
Because
electricity there, Dale Vince.
Yeah, I guess. But I mean internationally, I guess.
Like Mike Bloomberg. To an extent.
Or Soros, who has become actually instead, like Musk is celebrated among the right wing for what he does and for putting so much money behind it. George Soros, among progressives, has become a kind of shorthand of international conspiracy and, the WEF network.
And he's given away far more of his wealth as a proportion than Musk even. I mean, I think Soros would be in the top 3 richest people in the world if he hadn't given away over a third of his wealth to good progressive causes all over the world, particularly South Africa when the fund started all those years ago. Now, look, you've got to let him off the hook. He's about 93 now, or older, so fair enough. His son has taken over now to run the foundations. But they're not as visible. They don't do what Musk does. And Musk wasn't such a well-known figure until he inserted himself out there onto the world stage, talking to everyone and anyone and going on shows and traveling here and sitting on a thing with Rishi Sunak to talk about AI. Even though we may have the figures on the left who are philanthropic and who are funding things in the way that Musk intends to fund Reform UK or, other Republican causes, they don't talk about it. They're sort of more meek about their wealth distribution to progressive causes.
Do they do it, though?
I mean, Bill Gates used to do it
but
a lot,
does Bill Gates go out and say,
he used to do
here's
a lot more.
Bunch of newspapers that I agree with, so I'm going to give them loads of cash?
To my knowledge, he hasn't done for quite a while.
Part of it might perhaps be the shifting Overton window, and so the centre-left is sort of more sort of in the centre.
Yeah.
Perhaps we're craning our neck to keep peering through it. Well, the far right is now sort of the mainstream right. And so the sort of visionary politicians you might want to, that might come from the left with like bold redistribution of wealth plans aren't there because that space on the left is now sort of more moderately in the centre.
It is also some double standards, I think. I can't imagine the reaction if someone like Dale Vince decided to buy the Telegraph. They would go into meltdown. The entire thing would kick into gear to try and stop it. How much of this do you think is fueled by foreign interference? Like, to what extent has Putin actually been very successful in, with very modest means, destabilizing loads of Western democracies and Western sort of structures? And was Brexit really the first domino in that? I mean, might we come to see Brexit as a more important thing than we even credited with at the time?
Well, Crimea happens a couple of years before Brexit, true. So I think the pattern had begun. Look, the answer is we don't know. We may never know the full extent, but we know enough to know that it is happening, and governments around the world, notably most recently in Romania, are saying, hold on, we need to relook at all of this. Things have happened. We had our own Russia report that was heavily redacted and sat on for a very long time, but we do know. And at best for Britain, we had one instance of knowing that it had happened. So I can speak to what I do know. So, yeah, I'm 99% certain, and lots of the Russia experts I spoke to, including people like Arthur Snell, said this has got Kremlin written all over it. Quite a clunky approach to trying to do it, but for sure they do it. I'm not convinced that Western liberal democracies have got a full handle on it. We know that it's changing, that bots aren't so much the tool as paid trolls. So people that are now paid to not even watch a thing, but just sit and click like on it so that the algorithm then sends it to more and more people, whatever the piece of propaganda is. So who knows? I mean, look, our own parliament last week, Tortoise, uncovered that a member of the House of Lords, a Conservative peer, who sits on the APPG for Fair Elections, which is trying to push PR, has been trotting out very similarly worded Kremlin phrases in Parliament. So,
Wow.
and Ireland in the Dáil, we've been told that there is
I know, that
a
was
Russian
weird. Do you know about that
agent.
story, Henry? There's been an attempt to recruit several people in the Irish Parliament
Through
that
honey
have,
traps.
that have been successful with at least one person.
Who is the current sitting parliamentarian.
Yeah, so
But we're not allowed
someone
to know
is
who it
an
is.
actual Russian asset, but we're not allowed to know who. And it's like, how is that allowed?
I know.
In terms of, like, I mentioned deterrence earlier, nuclear deterrent, post-Cold War, hacking on this sort of scale is quite a good thing for a state like Russia to do, to sort of progress its aims without sort of coming up against a hostile force to push back against them. So it's quite a productive, low-cost, helpful way of sort of attaining their goals. Like you say, we won't know what the extent of it is and probably never will, but I'd guess probably a lot more than we think.
I met a Russian expert who I won't name during the referendum when I was working on the referendum, the EU referendum. And they would not meet me in about 4 places I suggested, and then met me somewhere very specific and said, in London, you are never more than 20 foot from a Russian who's listening into what you're saying. And he basically told me to back off a line of inquiry I was pursuing with the campaign. He said, you'll wind up dead, don't do it.
Amazing. Because it's such a diffuse subject, I think the call to action needs to be specific, and given what time of the year it is, I will drop a link in the show notes to the International Rescue Gaza Fund, who are currently raising basically to try and lessen the trauma over the coming month to the children in Gaza so that they see some sort of holiday season. And I will drop a link to that in the show notes.
Great days start with great underwear. So if you're looking for something special, give Tommy John and gift a better day. Everything we make is meticulously crafted from breathable stretch fabric for the perfect fit, including our sleepwear for him and her. It feels good to give, but it feels great to give Tommy John. Find something for everyone and pick up something for yourself, because at Tommy John, greatness is in our very fabric. Shop TommyJohn.com/Spotify right now and save 30% site-wide. TommyJohn.com/Spotify. See site for details.
Now it is time to tune the banjos and prepare for the thing that is making the anti-woke brigade's computer screens around the country spittle-feckled. It is time, of course, for Wokey Dokey.
Wokey Dokey.
What's on the specials board today, Alex?
PhDs, Naomi. More specifically, women doing PhDs, Naomi. Are you aware of the story about the woman who basically told Twitter that I've passed my Viva for my PhD, yay, only to get just millions of trolls, even threatening her with rape?
Because she did get a doctorate.
Well, the first thing was that they entirely misunderstood what her doctorate was in.
Standard.
So
I love that for them.
Half of the course.
So she's an English literature major, okay? And she did a doctorate called Olfactory Ethics, the Politics of Smell in Modern and Contemporary Prose. It was basically to talk about how writers use smells to describe the environment and how that has very powerful class and political dimensions. So her PhD is in English literature. So loads of trolls basically tweeted her going, she's done a PhD on the politics of smells. I mean, the responses were vile, and about half of them, I would say, were along the lines of, for instance, let me read a couple to you because they really are worth reading. Oh, look, another woman getting a useless degree. Women would rather spend years pursuing stupid degrees that won't fulfill them over a family that actually will. And there were a lot, and I mean a lot, of responses that were basically along the lines of she should stay home and have babies rather than getting herself this woke education. as I said, to the extent where there was a credible threat that me and my mates are going to sexually assault you, that she had to report to the police. I wanted to highlight that because I think it's actually part of the same piece about which we were talking before. I think there is another underlying thread to the emergence of right-wing populism in Western democracies especially, that does go along the lines of this insecurity about the birth rate, merges with mad white replacement type stuff that means women need to stay at home and have loads of babies, basically. And that is why it's also linked to the unwinding of women's reproductive rights. It's not a random connection. It's very much a strategic thing that says women basically becoming equals was the underlying cause of the fall of Western civilization. That is the basic argument.
I wrote a thing about it the other day saying it's like The Handmaid's Tale if it was directed by Michael Bay.
Yes. Yes. I mean, Michael Bay would direct The Handmaid's Tale as a sort of aspirational story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I've been quite struck this week by how many women who are older than me have defended Greg Wallace.
Have they?
Yeah. A lot of friends, mums, and that kind of cohort. People that read the Times, they see it as a paper of record. If it's in there, it's fact. And they, you know, they're not ultra right-wingers that are only consuming Daily Mail, but they have sort of said, oh, what's a bit of harmless banter? You know, bit of slap and tickle in my day, never hurt anyone, which has surprised me, actually. I'd have hoped for a little bit more solidarity.
That's interesting because, I mean, I'm not saying this will happen in the Greg Wallace case. I have no knowledge of the man or his misdeeds. But if you look at the last few scandals like that, like swimming a long way offshore very early on does not seem to me a smart thing to do, because in a month's time, there might be someone that comes out and has a much more serious allegation.
Exactly.
And then you'll be eating your words for a long time to come. But, you know, they know best, I guess. We, on this podcast, wanted to wish Dr. Ali Lux all the best with her academic career. Doing a PhD is a thing that involves a huge amount of hard work and research, and we are glad there are people out there who are curious about the world around them and doing things that basically haven't been researched before, because that's the whole point of a PhD. So well done, Dr. Ali Lux.
Hear, hear. Thank you, Alex.
Quiet riot.
Regular listeners may remember a show on Wales that I recorded a couple of months ago with award-winning Welsh journalist Will Hayward. We chatted through the latest upheavals in the Senedd, following Labour leader Vaughan Gething's debacle, the subsequent election of Baroness Eluned Morgan, and the ongoing strife within Welsh conservatism. To say Will isn't a fan of their now former leader, Andrew R.T. Davies, would be an understatement. So if you want the background, go back and have a listen before diving back into this show. Let it never be said that this isn't an influential podcast, because Andrew R.T. Davies is now no longer leader, having resigned this week following a no.
You are welcome, Henry.
Thank you very much.
Having resigned this week following a no confidence vote among his Senedd colleagues. Describing himself as 19 stone of prime Welsh beef, he blasted those who ousted him as the muesli and croissant brigade. And it appears he's pretty fond of early morning foods.
And conference, mark my words, we will make Brexit a success. Now, that's one word that wasn't meant to come out like that, was it?
With just 18 months to go until the next Senedd elections, Reform UK is sniffing around for gains in the former UKIP stronghold areas of Wales, and the latest polling by YouGov for ITV Wales and Cardiff University puts Plaid Cymru ahead by a point on 24% of the vote, Welsh Labour and Reform neck and neck on 23, Welsh Conservatives in fourth on 19. So a pretty unprecedented, genuine three-way tie at the moment between Plaid, Labour and Reform. So Henry, as a Welsh dweller, what's the vibe in your part of Wales at the moment?
That's a good question. I've spoken to more Trump supporters recently who will be Reform-led, I think, than I care to think about. Where I am is very Plaid Cymru. It's Welsh-speaking. It's sort of very proud Welsh area. Labour's been in power in Wales for an awfully long time, and the NHS's standstill has record waiting times, worse than other English regions, if that's how we should probably compare Wales, because that's how it's treated. Child poverty's dangerously high, 30% of children living in poverty. Not a power vacuum, but it's a ripe environment for someone to throw your vote at, to change everything, to mess things up, as someone I was talking to the other day said about Farage.
Well, as in they just want someone to come in and disrupt it all because the status quo...
He said Farage will fuck things up, Henry.
And we need them to.
Yeah.
Right.
He was eating a big kebab. Well, he said it. Welsh Conservatives have been wiped out. R.T. Davies is a whopper who's glad to see the back of. He's done some extraordinary things. Dehumanising lone child asylum seekers, claiming people eating halal food in a school in his constituency where they weren't. It's,
awful.
Good riddance to him. But
when we look at the Reform vote in that poll that I mentioned, and we sort of think about whether this is something Labour needs to be concerned about, the Reform support has come, it looks like, from previous Tory voters, as one might expect. And even in this poll, 17% of 2024 Tory voters say they'll vote Reform compared to 6% of Labour voters. So Reform have now got this choice ahead of them, whether they go after remaining Conservative support in Wales or they pivot a bit and try and pick off former Labour voters, because I think that very much is their plan. Do you know many Labour voters in your part of Wales? I mean, it sounds like they're mostly Plaid voters.
I know a few who wouldn't be susceptible to Reform.
They wouldn't be, no.
I think the people susceptible to Reform are in the South East Wales valleys and Port Talbot, were sort of deindustrialised or about to be deindustrialised places where prosperity has never arrived, and sort of outcomes, all the metrics you might care to use aren't good, and then they were never going to vote Tory.
And why wouldn't they vote Plaid?
It's a good question, and I think the answer lies in Welsh identity rather than sort of left-wing politics, which I think Plaid speak very coherently and ambitiously on a sort of centre-left platform, but they exist in the west of Wales where people speak Welsh, and there's a sort of perception in the east of Wales where people don't speak Welsh that it's sort of not for them. They're the Welsh rather than the English-speaking Welsh. I could easily be corrected on that, but I think that's quite a large factor of it.
So the nationalist identity basically is above the political one.
I think so. There's a lot of, in my opinion, very positive talking about the Welsh language, but they conduct a lot of stuff in Welsh language, which I think is great, but I can see could also be alienating to someone who doesn't know any in Ebbw or Cumbraen. But that said, Rhyn ap Iorwerth, he spoke brilliantly in most leaders' debates. I thought he came out on top when he was thrown into those seven-way contest.
Do you sense that Wales feels like Labour have had enough time in charge in Wales and they're likely to get...
Labour need to be very careful. Everyone you speak to says, they get excited because I used to be a secret Tory and they slag off the Tories. They won't say, but what have Labour done? Labour have ruined this country. I've heard that several times.
Well, I'm interested to know about the farming changes to inheritance tax.
Yeah, I know you have thoughts on that because you've been chatting to local.
I was in the pub with some farmers on Sunday, and as someone who went to Wales not knowing any farmers, but knowing a lot about biodiversity collapse and climate change, I sort of had a less sympathetic view to farmers than I do now when I'm surrounded by them, and they're my friends, and they're all really nice and go out of their way to help you. And I found the inheritance tax debate a few weeks ago really sort of put me personally in the middle of something really interesting, which was lots of people in London suddenly becoming experts on farming and tweeting long threads about everything they've suddenly Googled about it 2 minutes ago, and not really getting what the protests were about, which isn't just the inheritance tax, but nitrate rules and Australian lamb imports and all these other things which are building and building and building and putting pressure on farmers who often just earn a minimum wage. They don't earn anything. They're very asset rich, very cash poor. I find that really interesting because I think underneath it always the question is, what do we want farming to be for? Because maybe a lot of listeners would be surprised to hear how many subsidies they get, the size of the subsidies that go towards them. And at the moment, we're trying to change that towards environmentally sustainable subsidies, which they've just rode back on. So they've been offering Welsh farmers money to implement 10% tree coverage, which they were very unhappy about. And it was less money than they were getting before Brexit, and they had to lose some of their productive land to do it. Nonetheless, they've started doing it, and then they've just pulled the plug on the project, and now people have spent money doing that. They're not going to get the money. They didn't want to do it in the first place, but they did it because they thought they had to. So yeah, what is farming for? Governments, it's unsustainable economically if you take the subsidies away. So do we want our countryside to be stewarded by people who've looked after it all their lives and who we can encourage to do things like reverse habitat decline and restore carbon capture? Or do we want it to all get sold off to tax dodgers like Clarkson and Dyson? And I think the specifically inheritance tax thing was a blunt tool, which didn't address the problem. We need to have a serious discussion about it because it is the front line against climate change. And if we don't support them, they'll go to the wall, and then we'll be left with an even bigger question about what to do next.
My sympathy for them would have been at much, much higher ratios if they then didn't hold hands with Kemi Badenoch, who negotiated and signed those fucking deals that are hurting them, and Farage that made Brexit happen, that also cost them a shed load of money. So you have to have a little bit of cause integrity for people to support your cause. If your cause means that you will basically ally yourself with the people who you're complaining about that did all this long list of stuff to you, and then try to make the current government that's been in post for 5 months responsible for all of it, then my sympathy evaporates quite quickly.
I understand that, but I think the next stage beyond that is what happens next. Like the lads I was talking to on Sunday, they don't know about anything about that. They just want to know when they can put the fertiliser on the field and how much money they're going to have to pay for X, Y, and Z. They're not engaged in the Brexit negotiations or how it was engineered or any of the things that have led up to now. All I can just see is people in quite a vulnerable position who will go to the wall if too much changes too quickly. And that's the community I live in, and I don't want that to happen. So a sort of lack of sympathy for things that have gone before shouldn't extend to not wanting to offer optimism and solutions to things that could go further ahead.
The poll that I mentioned did ask about this issue very specifically of Welsh voters. So it didn't do a Westminster voting intention question. It asked them about how they're going to vote in the next Welsh elections. But it did then ask them a variety of issue-based things. And one of them was the government's handling of the farmers' inheritance tax issue. And the government was viewed particularly poorly with Welsh voters. So 64% thought it had been handled badly, only 15% well. And even among their own voters, it's negative, with a plurality of 2024 Welsh Labour voters saying that they've handled it badly. So, they still seem to be in a decent second place for Senedd elections. I think they might find it really quite tough if they don't turn things around there ahead of the next general election, having done a very good job in July at winning quite a few seats.
Reform's clearly targeting several areas in Wales. You will have seen the sort of trickle of Tory to Reform defections.
Oh, Tim Montgomery.
I know. I saw that today. And a lot of people were surprised. And I didn't understand why they were surprised. Like, a lot of people were saying, oh, he was quite a sensible moderate. What is he doing with reform? And I thought, well, you can't...
We're talking about the same person.
You can't have known much about Tim Montgomery in the last decade if you still place him in that Cameroon space that he was in 2010, maybe. I would say he's as close to the evangelical right as we have.
Yeah,
in this country. He's very
devoutly
religious,
Christian.
anti-equal marriage, not completely on board with women's autonomy, etc., etc.
Loves Brexit.
Do you think these are strategically staggered that we're seeing Andrea
Defections.
Jenkins went to, or are they organically happening because they sense that reformists on the app and Tories are on their way
momentum's
down?
with them,
Yeah.
and the sort of cannier political operators who are there for their career, seeing an opportunity. Good question, I don't know. Andrew R.T. Davies is a prime candidate.
You have
though, isn't
spent a lot of time studying the inner politics of the Tory party for writing
he? More than I'd like.
for writing your Shakespearean epic, which is, by the way, we'll drop a link in the show notes. It is a hilarious book. It's basically 5 acts, each of them a different cod Shakespearean satire of the 5 Conservative prime ministers, basically 1 act each. The Liz Truss act is short, but really quite touching.
Short but sweet.
What do you think is going on there? What's your
With the
instinct?
defections?
Yeah, that there's some big move coming, or
I don't know if Jenrick goes. Jenrick's a careerist, isn't he? He's
what do you think of Jenkins? Is she going to be good for them, or?
I mean, she sort of ticks a lot of the boxes. She's brash. She's evangelical Christian.
Is she? I
think
know.
so.
Sounds entirely.
I think that was her. Yeah, she fits the mould perfectly. She sort of says stupid things off the cuff, which sort of sound reasonable at the time until you think about it for more than 5 seconds, like cut from Lee Anderson's cloth, I think.
I've written about it and talked about it many times. Farage is following the lead of a guy called Preston Manning in Canada, who broke away from the traditional Conservative Party, set up the Reform Party of Canada, overtook the existing Conservative Party, and then it kind of all ended up morphing into one Conservative Party that he was at the helm of. And I've always thought Farage has drawn his inspiration from that. He is a Conservative. He didn't feel at home in his Conservative Party, but he's longed to be back in it. He hasn't been, and instead he set up his own one, and I think could easily try and absorb a huge amount of the current Conservative Party, if not the entire operation, over the course of the next few years. I mean, if Reform and the Conservatives did do some kind of deal at the next election, they will win.
Yeah.
As current polling infers. Obviously, everything can change and we're a long way from the elections.
Yeah, I was going
So,
to
you
say,
know, but they
brave
will
prediction.
be gaming all of that out. And Richard Tice has begun talking to people about, hey, maybe we're not so fond of PR. Maybe Reform can win big under first past the post. And there was a vote in the Commons the day before we recorded this show, which was a motion brought forward by Sarah Olney, the Liberal
And
Democrat
one of them
MP
voted
for-
against.
And you know, not all Reform MPs came out in
Which is
favour
just
of
astonishing.
PR, which is astonishing.
Chief
Really
Whip needs to have a
astonishing.
word with himself.
I mean, I know, right? 5 people. You could get up at 9 o'clock and be done work-wise at 9:10.
Come on, Lee.
What do you think about Musk dangling 100 million?
Terrifying.
So I see a lot of people are saying we have to tighten up donation laws and quickly. Is that a solution? I mean, something in me says that if a rich fool wants to part with 100 million and a party wants to take it, they'll find a way, right?
Exactly.
Is there a way to stop? I mean, he'll just bung it to someone else as a procurement contract that's
Or it ends
based
up
in
in
the
Tufton
UK.
Street.
Yeah, exactly. And
I mean, I think we still have to tighten up donation rules.
Sure.
Anyway, but I think you're right. The money will find its way into their pockets if it wants to.
And may I just say, on the other side, there is nothing. You've got UK and a changing Europe saying that their funding is now under question from ESRC, not necessarily going to give them another grant. Other pro-European organisations I know are similarly struggling. I can tell you at Best for Britain, we've never had a more challenging fundraising environment at the moment. And I despair because look how much money the right pumped into the pro-Brexit libertarian
right-leaning groups in Tufton Street while the Conservatives and the Brexiters were in government.
Yep.
You don't abandon your civil society just because you've got the keys to number 10. They need you to flank them. You need that, particularly now when we're looking at how tricky the next election might be. So, I just want to know, where is our Elon Musk figure with his $100 million
if you're listening and you're a
check?
gazillionaire, can you fucking sort it? Okay, but a questionette for you. Do those organizations, I'm not talking about Best for Britain because that's not their mission, but like the more progressive, let's say, economic think tanks, do they flank the government when it's a Labour government, or do they criticize it as vehemently as the Tufton Street ones do? Because there is a question there. Like the right-wing think tanks, they know which side their bread is buttered on. They will criticize within limit, but when they're under threat, they will close ranks. Do the left-leaning, the progressive
a lot of them aren't
leaning
really think tanks on the right.
Yeah.
They're phone think tanks.
Sure.
And as we know, and as people like Peter Gagan have done brilliant investigative journalism work on his Substack and previously at Open Democracy, kind of showing the web of those groups and that they've often got the same board of directors and, there's not actually any difference. They're just sort of brands, the brand names that are hoovering up money and then running ads and doing whatever to try and persuade people of the libertarian message. So I think there is a part of you that is correct on that, the left love to fall out with each other and pick holes in each other's work and cry foul at anything that's not pure. But I don't think you could say that organisations like Resolution Foundation and IPPR are not aligned with the broad thrust and agenda of the Labour government. And I think are just trying to nudge them in the right direction on certain things around, child poverty or inequality or whatever it is that they're working on at the moment. Then there are, of course, the groups that are hypercritical, but I wouldn't necessarily call them think tank.
At risk of oversimplifying it, is part of it perhaps that if you're donating money on the right side of things, it's partly about protecting your own investments and you get a bit of a return. Yeah. You get some money back if you can get some bit of lobbying business through. And if you're on the left, you're sort of putting money in altruistically or ideologically. And
I don't know. I think Blair gave out quite a few peerages.
Oh, well, yeah, of course. But I don't know, maybe, I don't know. It's just, it seems like you get a bit more of a return if you're chucking money with Tories.
Very directly, that's worked out for Musk. I mean, he's an example of someone who paid 45 billion to buy Twitter, and everyone was going, what a dick. It's hugely overvalued. But that was the fulcrum with which he basically inserted himself into Trump's circle and now Trump's government.
So to speak.
And
sorry.
Well, he must.
I couldn't resist.
But the point is now his stock is up by twice that. So he's actually made, he's doubled his money in a year, which is not bad.
Quiet Riot. Blinds.com Cyber Monday Last Chance is happening now. Don't miss out on up to 45% off site-wide. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 45% site-wide, plus a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
So there is a Christmas single, I'm afraid. It is...
Has Henry got a song out?
We will drop a little bit of it here for listeners.
We're gonna sing the songs that make the whole world jolly. It's the greatest time of year, and if we have our way, no one's gonna miss out on this special day. There's a reason for the season. Everyone deserves a Christmas.
So Mal Pope and Labour MP Caroline Harris, they've released a little Welsh Christmas single to help a charity that delivers hampers to families that are in financial hardship around 5 constituencies in Wales. It's kind of terrible, but also incredibly sweet. And we would like you to give it a download and support it. And let's make it Christmas number 1 because
a day we shouldn't get the top spot.
But also, why not? Like, it's a really sweet thing for a really good cause. And also, I would encourage all of you to buy Henry's book as a Christmas present. So go and do it. It is utterly hilarious. We might read a tiny bit of it for you post-credit. We'll see if we feel like it, but we'll drop a link to that in the show notes.
I endorse this message.
Quiet Riot.
Right, it's now the portion of the programme where we look for some yang to balance the immense amounts of yin currently on offer and get you on your way with a flicker of hope for humanity. It's time for Grin and Share It.
Good news is welcome to me. Bad news is hell come to me. Good news. Do-de-o-do-lo, 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 I want good news.
Naomi, what might provide salvation? What's the good news this week?
Well, with all of Henry's talk about biodiversity and species loss and things like that, I can't tell you, listeners, how much he does put his money where his mouth is. And he brought us some lovely honey from his neighbour who keeps bees. And my story this week for Grin and Share It is all about the bees, because a field in Scotland has become pollinator paradise after an intervention from a local trust saw bumblebee numbers increase 100-fold. So there's an area north of Perth. It's only about 90 acres. And surveys of bumblebees before the project began rarely recorded more than 50. But by 2023, just 2 years of letting nature take the lead, so basically rewilding, that number has shot up to 4,000, with a number of different bee species doubling. So the whole place is called Rewilding Denmark Field.
It's a bumblebee sanctuary,
It
basically.
is. And not only bumblebees, because, of course, we talk about biodiversity and you get diverse insect groups and other flora and fauna as a consequence of this. So it's all run by the Bumblebee Conservation Trust, and the project has seen a sharp increase in the number of species passing through the rolling meadow after they were reclaimed by dozens of wildflower species. They've recorded huge population growth in butterflies as well, with a tripling of these number of insects on average during any kind of ramble through the field. And the numbers of both are now so high that Rewilding Denmark Field offers bee and butterfly safaris.
Amazing.
Shall we do a team trip? I feel like we should.
And I bet it's also good for the buwch goch.
Well, buwch goch gotta.
Goch gotta.
Is the ladybird, the little red cow. A bumblebee is cachi bum. And a
cachi bum. That sounds like a Scouse insult.
Well,
she had a cachi bum.
I think I might have just murdered the pronunciation. But
that's said Naomi.
I'll bring it back. A butterfly is a pilly-palla.
Oh, that's lovely. Pilly-palla. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Naomi. And listeners, as ever, we'll drop in a link in the show notes so you can not just grin, but also share the joy.
Quiet Riot.
And that's a wrap. Time has flown by once more.
We are really looking forward to our Ask Us Anything session. Reminder, that is this coming Monday, 6 p.m. for our Ko-Fi backers. And if you want to be part of the Quiet Riot family, so that you can be involved in the next one, if you're not already signed up for that one, visit ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. One-off donation or small monthly gift will get you previews to live show tickets. It will get you access to our forthcoming editorial meeting in Q1 next year.
So, yeah, in January, we have our next quarterly editorial meeting coming, and it will be open to all our Ko-Fi supporters. And it really does guide our podcast, your podcast, I should say. It generates ideas for topics, for guests, for regular features. In fact, Grin and Share It was a listener idea from our last editorial meeting. So we do listen to you.
Sorry. The idea of doing a good news story came from them, but Pun Queen came up with the actual name.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. I do add some value occasionally to this show.
Well done there, Naomi. You really got one over the people who actually send us money for this podcast. So, yes, maybe that's why the funding environment is tough.
So all that remains is to thank you all, but especially our wonderful guest, Henry Morris.
Welcome, William.
Listeners, thank you very much once again for giving us your limited time and precious attention week after week.
We love you lots. Stay safe, stay sane, stay riotous. Until Sunday. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith, Alex Andreou, and produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta, artwork by Simona Canelu, and edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
So, the Redwall Tory MPs are performing a play within a play for the more sort of urbane MPs like Jeremy Hunt and Michael Gove. And Andrea Jenkins and Jonathan Gullis are meeting by moonlight. With either side of a wall.
Right. Red wall, full often hast thou heard our moans. So this is a wall where they go to basically wail at.
So it's the mechanical scene from A Midsummer Night's Dream, where they meet either side of a wall, it's now a red wall.
Yeah. Red wall, full often hast thou heard our moans. We're not. I should do a voice for Andrea Jenkins, shouldn't I?
You could be Gullis and I could be Jenkins.
No, he wants to be Gullis.
Oh, okay.
You can be Brendan Clark Smith.
All right.
Red wall, full often hast thou heard our moans. We're not deporting enough refugees, for southern MPs have oft lacked thy stones to expel the unwanted emigres.
I see a voice, now will I to the chink to spy, and I can hear Andrea's face. Jenkins?
Gullis thou art, Gullis I think.
MP for Stoke-on-Trent, Kidsgrove and Tork, and unlike Lee Anderson, trusty still.
Traitorous defector, grifting shill.
Like Barry to Janine, I love our flag.
As Janine to Barry, I'm no reform slag. Well, I am now, aren't I?
Economic migrants, we must deport all.
Send them to Rwanda, or England'll fall.
Wilt thou at Churchill's too meet me straightway?
Tide life, tide death, I come without delay.
Thus has Clark Smith my part discharged so, and being done, red wall away doth go. Very good.
My Andrea Jenkins was completely inspired by Babs
from the League of Gentlemen.
Yeah, in the League of Gentlemen, the cab driver.
You wouldn't be allowed to write that character now, I don't think.
No, you're not allowed to say you're English nowadays. They put you in jail.
You can't.
You can't say now these days. They put you in jail.